Canada just got outpaced by one of America's poorest states, not in some obscure measurement cooked up by a political opponent, in cold, hard GDP per capita backed by the IMF, confirmed by The Economist and the Financial Times. Alabama, a state most Canadians would laugh at, is now generating more economic output per person than this entire country. And when that stat went public, something revealing happened. Instead of asking how we got here, the response from media, economists, and politicians was to explain why the number doesn't really matter, but it does matter. And the reason they don't want you sitting with that comparison for too long is because the full story behind it is far more uncomfortable than one embarrassing headline. So here's something that sent the entire Canadian internet into a full meltdown. A report dropped, backed by the IMF, showing that Canada's GDP per capita had fallen below Alabama, not California, not New York, Alabama, one of the poorest states in all of America. The Globe and Mail ran the headline, and people absolutely lost it. There's this X account called Polling Canada, pretty well known, and the guy running it posted something along the lines of, "People are seriously arguing Alabama has a higher standard of living than Canada. Are they smoking crack?" He thought it was a joke. It wasn't. The post got over 2,200 replies and got slapped with a community note confirming the stat was actually true. And here's what makes this even more embarrassing. Alabama isn't some economic powerhouse. It's ranked the fourth poorest state in the entire country. Canada just got lapped by a below-average American state that doesn't have our oil, doesn't have our land, and by most accounts has a lower education level than we do. But what Alabama does have is low taxes, less red tape, and a government that mostly stays out of the way of businesses trying to grow. The numbers aren't even close either. Alabama sits at around $60,000 GDP per capita. Canada, about $54,000 to $55,000. That's not a rounding error, that's a real gap. And this wasn't just Twitter noise. The Economist covered it, the Financial Times covered it. It made it all the way to Parliament, where conservatives were hammering the government with it at every opportunity. The story had legs because the stat was real, and nobody on the other side could actually make it disappear. But what happened next was something else entirely. Next, 1309, Section 2, the denial machine. When a stat this embarrassing goes viral, there are two ways to handle it. You own it and figure out how to fix it, or you spin it so hard that people forget what they were even upset about. Canada's media and political class went with option 2, hard. The CBC, Canada's national broadcaster, rushed out a segment almost immediately, and instead of saying, "Yeah, this is bad, here's what went wrong," they brought on an economist named Mike Moffat to basically talk Canadians off the ledge. His take? We shouldn't be comparing ourselves to Alabama at all. We should just focus on being better than we were yesterday. Which sounds nice. Except Canada has been worse than yesterday for about 5 straight years. GDP per capita has been dropping consistently, so that just improve on yourself advice is a little hollow when the trend line has been pointing down for half a decade. Then came the stat gymnastics. Economist Jim Stanford called GDP per capita a deeply flawed measurement. Others pivoted to happiness indexes, UN Human Development Rankings, lifespan statistics, anything to avoid sitting with the actual number. But here's the thing. When you check the median income comparison instead of GDP per capita, Alabama still wins. So what exactly is the argument? And the cost of living piece makes it even worse. 600,000 Canadian dollars gets you a genuinely nice home in Alabama. That same amount of money in Vancouver doesn't even cover a down payment on a rundown condo. The purchasing power gap is enormous, and no happiness index makes that disappear for a family trying to get by. The denial was loud, but underneath it, the real story was just getting started. Next, 1310. Section 3. How Canada actually got here. Here's where it gets uncomfortable, Because the easy answer is to blame the last government and move on. And while the Liberal years absolutely made things worse, the real rot in Canada's economy goes back 2 or 3 decades. This didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen because of one politician. The core problem is productivity. It sounds boring, but it's everything. Productivity is basically how much value a country creates per hour of work, and Canada's productivity has been flatlining for years. The OECD, one of the most respected economic organizations on the planet, projects Canada will finish dead last among all advanced economies for productivity growth all the way through 2060. That's not a rough patch, that's a structural failure. Part of why is where Canada decided to put its money. Canadians invest roughly 2.5 times more into real estate than into the machinery, technology, and equipment that actually makes workers more effective. We chose condos over computers, rental properties over robotics, and we've been paying for that choice ever since. Then there's the brain drain situation, which is honestly one of the more quietly devastating parts of this story. Canada spent years attracting skilled immigrants, engineers, software developers, researchers, giving them credentials and citizenship. And then those same people looked at the salaries, the housing costs, and the career opportunities available, compared them to what was waiting across the border at Google, Meta, or OpenAI, and left. Canada essentially became a prep school for the American economy. We do the training, the US gets the talent. And sitting underneath all of it is the resource curse. Canada got comfortable digging things out of the ground and shipping them out. Oil, minerals, lumber, easy money. So the innovation economy that other countries were building during the same period, Canada mostly skipped it. And now the global economy has shifted toward technology and high-value industries, and Canada is showing up to that race decades late. But as bad as all of that sounds, there's one more layer to this that almost nobody is talking about. Next 1310, Section 4, the ticking time bomb nobody talks about. Here's a number that should be making front-page news every single day, but somehow barely gets mentioned. Canada is sitting on $7 trillion in unfunded healthcare and pension obligations. To put that in perspective, that's roughly 2.5 times Canada's entire GDP. That's not money that was borrowed. That's money that was promised to future retirees that simply hasn't been generated yet. For a long time, this wasn't a crisis because the math worked. Canada had a young population, lots of workers paying into the system, fewer retirees drawing from it. Back in the 1970s, there were about 6 working-age people for every single retiree. The pyramid was stable and the money flowed the way it was supposed to. That pyramid is now flipping upside down. By 2030, that ratio drops to around 2.5 workers per retiree. Every retiree will be supported by less than half the workers that supported them before. And remember, wages are stagnant and productivity is flat. So those fewer workers need to generate dramatically more tax revenue just to keep the lights on. The math simply does not work. And the fallback plan was always immigration. Bring in young skilled workers, rebuild the base of the pyramid, keep the system funded. Except those immigrants are facing the exact same impossible cost of living that everyone else is. Housing consuming half their income. No realistic path to homeownership, and so they stop having children too. The strategy that was supposed to save the demographic pyramid is running into the same wall everything else is running into. Canada's fertility rate right now sits at 1.3 births per woman. You need 2.1 just to maintain the population naturally. When it costs 26 years of saving to afford a down payment on a home, starting a family stops being a plan and starts being a fantasy. Every major institution that tracks this stuff, the Fraser Institute, the Parliamentary Budget Office, the C.D. Howe Institute, has flagged these unfunded liabilities as a ticking clock. Governments know. They've known for years. They just keep hoping the problem lands on someone else's watch. And that's really the thread running through this entire story. Not one catastrophic mistake, but decades of kicking hard decisions down the road until the road ran out. Next, give me 150 words long. 13:10. Conclusion. So let's zoom out and look at the full picture. Canada fell below Alabama on GDP per capita. The media tried to spin it away, but underneath that one embarrassing headline is a decades-long story of stalled productivity, a housing market that ate an entire generation's future, a brain drain that turned the country into a talent pipeline for America, and a $7 trillion demographic time bomb that nobody in power wants to touch. The frustrating part is that Canada holds more natural advantages than South Korea, Singapore, or Ireland had when they turned their economies completely around. The land, the resources, the educated population, it's all still there. But advantages don't mean anything if nobody acts on them. The Alabama comparison wasn't the insult Canadians thought it was. It was a warning. And the real question now is whether anyone is actually listening.